Hey guys, tonight we drift gently into a vineyard, not just any vineyard, but one tucked on a quiet slope where the god Dionysus tends his grapes at dusk. You arrive not to a riot of drums or the swirl of ecstatic dancers, but to something simpler, slower, and far more grounded: the soft rustle of grape leaves in a dying breeze, the chirp of a solitary cricket, and the scent of dust and ripe fruit hanging thick in the golden air. The sky is in no hurry to dim. It stretches above you in lavender and faded peach, like someone softly erasing a watercolor. Cicadas hum, not yet sleepy, but getting there, and the vines. They stretch in neat, deliberate rows, no chaos, no tangled wildness, just tidy lines drawn by a god with a taste for symmetry. Yes, Dionysus, the so-called mad god of wine and revelry, is here, but not the way you've seen him in those dramatic amphora paintings. No leopard skin, no wide-eyed frenzy, just a calm figure in worn linen, sleeves rolled, eyes soft. He carries pruning shears, not a goblet. And his mood tonight, somewhere between quiet satisfaction and end-of-day fatigue, the kind that comes after a job well done. Reality check: this isn't the version of Dionysus the myths usually bother writing down. Most storytellers prefer him loud, drunk, and shouting in riddles. But tonight, you get the overlooked edition: the vineyard tending, grape harvest counting, evening light loving side. Not so much a god of chaos as a slightly tired farmhand who happens to be immortal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far off or local, I'd love to know. Drop your location and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by walking the perimeter of the vineyard, your sandals catching on dry clumps of earth. The soil is red and stubborn, with little pebbles that press up through the ground like reminders that gods can't make every field easy. You pause to brush a leaf off your shoulder and notice a ladybug navigating the folds of a grapevine. She looks as determined as you feel. The grapes themselves are dusky purple, clustered low and heavy like sleeping birds. Some are split from the sun, others are perfect. Each row smells slightly different, some sweeter, others a bit musky. You're told this has to do with the slope and the sun. You nod, as if you understand vineyard science, though really, you're more focused on not tripping over a basket. A few temple workers wave at you gently. No one speaks above a hush. It's as if the vines would wilt from raised voices. Dionysus believes that the grapes absorb energy from their surroundings, moods, intentions, even posture. So everyone here walks like they're gliding, talks like they're praying, and picks grapes as if they were holding a lover's hand. The tools are simple: curved knives tied with rope, baskets lined with reeds. No bronze, no drama. You're handed a pair of gloves and shown how to twist the stem just so. The vine resists you once or twice, as if unsure of your qualifications. But soon you find a rhythm: reach, twist, tuck, breathe, repeat. The harvest isn't a frenzy, it's a lullaby with knives. There's a myth that the original grapevine was a gift from a goat who chewed through sacred bark and accidentally fermented the sap. Historians still argue whether that story was meant to be a joke or a metaphor for the dangers of untamed nature. As Dionysus, you're told, liked the version where the goat ends up immortalized as a star in the sky. Goat mythology wildly underappreciated. At the end of one row, you find a shrine, small, hidden beneath an overgrown olive tree. A clay figurine of Dionysus leans awkwardly, one hand holding a tiny amphora. His face is cracked, but someone has painted tiny vines up his legs. Offerings of raisins and old wine slosh lazily in a chipped bowl nearby. A kitten sleeps beside it, tail twitching. The sun finally begins to dip below the hill, and shadows stretch long across the vines. You hear a reed flute somewhere, just a few notes floating above the fields. It's not a performance, more like a reminder. The vineyard isn't asleep yet, but it's thinking about it. A breeze picks up. It smells of pressed leaves, warm stone, and a little bit of honey. The baskets are half full now, the grapes stacked like plums in a child's drawing. You rest one hand against a vine and feel it hum faintly, whether from the wind, the god's presence, or your own tired heartbeat. You're not sure. Behind you, Dionysus sighs contentedly. He watches the sun melt into the sea and whispers something about balance. You don't catch all the words, but you get the gist. There's power in calm. Fermentation needs patience. And sometimes, the loudest miracles begin with quiet roots. You follow Dionysus deeper into the vineyard, your pace matching his measured footsteps. He walks like someone with nowhere urgent to be, which is probably true. Immortals, after all, rarely have tight schedules. His robe sways slightly as he moves, catching on the ends of the grape leaves. Every so often, he stops to brush dirt from a vine's base or adjust the tilt of a basket. The god of wine. Yes, but tonight, more like a slow-moving gardener with an encyclopedic knowledge of mildew prevention. You glance around. The vineyard is terraced, with dry stacked stones separating levels like the steps of a forgotten amphitheater. You half expect a chorus to pop out from behind the rosemary bushes, but instead, you hear bees, just a few, latecomers, buzzing lazily among the vines as if they've also heard this vineyard is more spa retreat than worksite. Dionysus pauses to inspect a knot in a vine, crouching low. This one's older than most kings, he murmurs, not to you specifically, but to the plant. He gently fingers a leaf, as if checking for gossip. You notice his fingernails are stained purplish, a quiet badge of labor. Not the badge of a divine party animal, but of someone who's genuinely invested in his crop. This version of Dionysus seems to enjoy whispering to plants more than shouting at mortals. A temple apprentice joins you, barefoot, dirt-smudged, and humming tunelessly. She offers you a bowl of pomegranate seeds without making eye contact, then disappears behind a cypress. Apparently, everything here moves with the same dreamy rhythm. Even the fruit snacks are offered like minor blessings. Dionysus stops under a fig tree and leans against the trunk. The wildness comes later, he says, eyes half closed. Right now, it's the breathing part. His voice is deep and slow, like someone who rarely feels the need to repeat himself. You don't ask what the wildness means. Not yet. Instead, he begins walking again, and you stay close behind, passing beneath a trellis strung with hanging vines. The grapes here are paler, almost green gold, suns and shaped slightly differently. These are the muse's variety, he says, supposed to help with poetry, or dreams, or both. He shrugs, or neither. You ask him if different grapes make different wines. His face brightens, just a little. Of course, some are for quiet breakfasts, some are for sacred rites, and some, he says with a sly smile, are for the kind of nights people pretend they don't remember. You walk past a small circle of stones, the base of an old altar, long disused. Dionysus lingers, tracing the rim with his toe. This was where they used to pour the first cup, he says, before temples got fancy. You imagine a line of humble people, all waiting to tip a bit of wine into the dirt, whispering thanks to vines they'd never planted. A rural devotion, sacred simplicity. The path turns, and you emerge into a small clearing, where rows of grapevines have been trimmed low. Here, the earth is softer, as though recently turned. Dionysus kneels and pulls something from the soil, a buried amphora, narrow and sealed with wax. He holds it up, studying the layer of dust. 10 years, he says. Still too young. You blink. Too young. Some things take time, he replies, as if quoting a proverb no longer popular. Then he carefully reburies the vessel. You wonder how many others are hidden, aging quietly beneath your feet, entire wine cellars buried like treasure, awaiting a day when someone, perhaps not even a god, feels it's finally the right moment. Historians still argue whether I ever existed, Dionysus says casually, dusting off his hands. They think I was stitched together from too many myths. But myths are like wine. Blend enough stories, and you get something worth sipping. It's strange, hearing a deity muse about his own historicity. Stranger still how matter-of-fact he is about it. No divine thunder, no dramatic pause, just a shrug and the breeze tugging at the corner of his robe. You continue walking as night deepens. Crickets take over from the bees, and the air cools. Somewhere behind a hill, an owl asks a quiet question. No one answers. Eventually, Dionysus leads you to a bench carved from pale stone. He sits, you sit, together. You watch the vineyard breathe in shadows. It no longer looks like a field. It looks like a dream you might have once had and forgotten. Rows of plants gently moving in the dark, holding ripened secrets and slow magic. He turns to you. Harvests aren't rushed. They're persuaded. You nod, not because you fully understand, but because it feels true in that moment. Something in your bones agrees, or maybe it's the pomegranate. The stars begin to sharpen overhead. One shoots lazily westward. Dionysus doesn't even glance up. He's watching a bat circle the grape arbor. She comes back every year, he says softly, and just like that, you realize this vineyard isn't just sacred, it's remembered. Every leaf, every stone, every nocturnal visitor is part of a larger memory, a memory that doesn't need books or bards, just dusk and silence and a God who listens more than he speaks. The air thickens slightly as you move into the lower part of the vineyard. Here, the soil is darker, cooler underfoot. The slope gathers shadows more quickly, and the breeze carries a faint tang of fermenting fruit. It's the kind of scent that's hard to name, half sweetness, half something older, like time collapsing gently in on itself. You've barely adjusted to the dimness when a new rhythm finds you. A small group of workers is moving in slow sync down a row, carefully picking bunches and laying them into woven baskets. One hums, another softly clicks 2 stones together, creating a beat that the others seem to follow without speaking. You're handed a pair of pruning shears, much older than they look. They've clearly been sharpened so many times that the handles are more curved than straight line. An elderly man gestures toward the grapes and makes a motion like a cradle. The meaning is clear, pick gently. Carry like something breakable. You join the row. The others don't acknowledge you with words, but one of them offers you a fig and a nod. That seems to be the welcome ceremony here. You begin harvesting again, the fruit cool and damp in your hands. Every cluster snipped sounds like a soft exhale. No one rushes, no one checks the time. You ask the woman next to you how long the harvest takes. She blinks slowly and says, until the vines stop whispering, and then returns to her work. It turns out grapevines are surprisingly chatty, at least according to vineyard lore. Each variety, they say, hums differently when it's ready. Some whine when picked too early. Others go silent if ignored. Historians still argue whether this is metaphor or early bioacoustics. One fragment from an Athenian papyrus even describes temple vintners chanting to the vines to keep them joyful. Dionysus, predictably, took credit for inventing the chant. A few steps ahead, you catch a low chuckle. Dionysus is kneeling next to a particularly heavy vine, gently lifting a sagging branch. This one's greedy, he says with amusement. Grew more fruit than it can hold. Happens every year. He rearranges it, whispering something into the leaves, words too quiet to catch. You spot a large clay jar nearby, marked with a painted crescent. Someone has etched a face into its surface, giving it a wide-eyed, startled expression. It's full of harvested grapes, already sweating with juice. A temple boy dips a ladle into it and pours the liquid onto a patch of earth. You ask why. He shrugs, for the roots, so they don't forget what they gave. It's a gentle kind of superstition, the kind that's hard to dismiss when the world feels this timeless. Near the edge of the clearing stands a crumbling statue of a panther, half swallowed by ivy. Its marble eyes are dulled by centuries of rain. Dionysus follows your gaze. That used to scare people, he says, back when I needed to be scary. His voice is wistful, like someone flipping through a photo album of bad fashion choices. You ask if he misses it, the fanfare, the frenzy. He smiles slowly. Not tonight, and really, it's hard to imagine revels here, with the light so gold and the silence so patient. You kneel again, working through another vine, careful not to disturb a snail making its way up a nearby stem. The others around you continue in their quiet rhythm. Some hum, some chew herbs. One older woman mutters names to herself with every cut, as if thanking the vines personally. By the time you reach the end of the row, your basket is full. You hadn't noticed. Your hands are sticky, your knees dusty, and your shoulders loose. Not tired, not sore, just pleasantly used. Dionysus steps beside you, looks at your basket, and nods. You'd make a decent priest, he says, deadpan, then adds, but the paperwork would kill you. You laugh softly, because in this vineyard, even jokes arrive on tiptoe. He lifts your basket and begins walking toward the pressing shed. You follow, feet crunching softly on gravel. The sun has almost disappeared now, just a streak of bronze hanging above the horizon, like a coin slowly sinking in a jar of honey. In this moment, time doesn't matter. There are no calendars here, only ripeness, rhythm, and rituals carried out because they feel right, not because someone wrote them down as you walk. Dionysus pauses beneath a wooden arch. He reaches up and pulls a single overripe grape from the vine. He pops it into his mouth, closes his eyes, and nods once. It's beginning. He murmurs, "You don't ask what, you just nod too." The harvest, it seems, speaks for itself. The pressing shed looks more like a stable than a place of ritual. Its walls are made from rough stone, cool to the touch, with dried vines curling around the doorframe. The scent that greets you as you enter is earthy and overwhelming. crushed fruit, damp wood, and the faintest hint of thyme. Somewhere nearby, lavender has been bundled and left to dry, its sleepy fragrance mingling into the mix like a quiet guest at an already mellow party. Inside, the space is dimly lit by oil lamps tucked into alcoves. The flames' reflections dance over racks of amphorae, each sealed with wax and painted with what appear to be cryptic labels: swirls, stars, tiny drawn goats. You decide not to ask for translations. It feels like one of those places where the less you understand, the more sacred it becomes. In the center of the room, a wide stone basin sits slightly sunken into the floor. Around it, barefoot workers stand in a slow circle, their hems pulled up and their eyes half lidded with focus. They're pressing grapes the old way, by foot, not stomping, not dancing, more like a slow, ceremonial squish. Every footfall seems to sync with reverence. You swear you can hear the juice sigh as it's released. You're invited to join, naturally. A quiet nod, a pair of rolled up trousers, and someone points to an empty spot in the circle. You place one foot in, and the temperature surprises you, cooler than expected, and thicker. Not unpleasant, just deliberate. The sensation of stepping into something both ancient and alive as you move with the others. Your mind slows. There's no need for chatter or thinking, really, just the rhythm. Step, press, lean, repeat. The smell of fermenting juice rises like incense. Grapes pop beneath your feet, surrendering to gravity and tradition. The sound is somewhere between a squelch and a murmur. Someone begins to sing, not loudly, not clearly, just a drifting melody, like a lullaby with no beginning. Others join in, wordless harmonies that curl through the rafters and brush the back of your neck. It's not a performance. It's more like the room itself remembering something. Dionysus watches from a stool in the corner, sipping from a carved wooden cup. His expression is unreadable. You ask if he ever stomps grapes himself. He smiles and lifts one foot slightly to show a faint purple stain. Only when the mood strikes, he says, or when someone needs reminding that gods can get sticky too. There's a wall covered in tools, curved ladles, long-handled scoops, thick brushes made from bundled straw. Each has been lovingly worn smooth. You run your fingers over one, surprised by the softness of the handle. Everything in this space feels used in the best way, like it's been handled by many hands, each one adding a little more memory. Off to one side, a small clay figure hangs from a hook. It's shaped like a goat, with exaggerated horns and a wide grin. Someone strung a tiny garland of rosemary around its neck. You point to it, and a nearby worker whispers, "That's Carpassos, patron of good batches and stubborn barrels." You nod solemnly. Every vineyard needs a goat god with opinions. Historians still debate whether the pressing process was ever this quiet. Some records describe loud music, dancing, even the occasional wrestle. Others suggest it was more sacred, an offering in motion. This particular vineyard seems to have chosen the second version, or maybe both versions exist here, but at different times of day. The juice, now as thick reddish purple, flows gently through a carved channel into a waiting clay vat. You watch it swirl in slow spirals. It smells rich, alive. You wonder how long it will sit before it becomes wine. You ask someone. They answer until it forgets it was fruit. You nod again, because that's the kind of logic this place runs on. The singing fades. The pressing slows. The workers begin stepping out one by one, rinsing their feet in a shallow basin at the edge of the room. You do the same. The water is cool, tinged pink. You feel a little like a statue being washed after a long stay in the weather. Dionysus rises and stretches. Time to rest the must, he says. He sets his cup down and walks toward the vat, placing his palm over the opening, not to bless it. Exactly. More like to acknowledge it, like greeting a friend who's about to take a long nap. You leave the shed with your legs tingling and your senses dulled in a comforting way. The stars have thickened above, smeared into ribbons of light, somewhere. A wind chime clinks softly, though you don't see one. A temple boy hands you a fig leaf to wipe your hands. You thank him. He says nothing, just gestures toward the hill, where you're meant to go next. Dionysus walks beside you. You're settling in. He observes. You ask if that's good. He shrugs. Depends if you planned to leave. The path ahead winds upward, between rows of vines that now look like sleeping creatures. You don't rush. After all, neither do the grapes, neither does the god. The path narrows as it winds upward, lined with cypress trees that cast long, elegant shadows across your steps, somewhere nearby. An owl calls again, this time closer, as if keeping pace with you. The night is fully arrived now, with the sky pulled tight and dark above you, stitched with stars that blink like slow thoughts. You reach the top of a small rise, where an open-air storage shed leans gently against a slope. Its walls are mostly lattice, wooden slats interlaced to let the air through and keep the grapes cool. Inside are the tools of Dionysus's trade, though nothing here glimmers or gleams. No ceremonial gold, no divine radiance, just practicality, softened by time. He walks in ahead of you, gesturing toward an assortment of baskets, pruning knives, shears, and strangely shaped clay weights. One long-handled tool looks like a question mark made of bronze. Another resembles a flattened ladle with teeth. These are the ones that survived, he murmurs, running a hand along the wall. The rest got lost in wars, floods, or divine tantrums. He says this without irony, as if divine tantrums are simply part of agricultural history. You pick up one of the knives. It's small, with a curved edge and a worn leather grip, the kind of thing that would be ignored in a museum case. But here, it has gravity. Dionysus notes your interest and smiles. That one belonged to a mortal who taught me how to prune. He didn't know who I was. I paid him in raisins and flattery. You laugh softly. He grins. Some of the best lessons come from people who don't care about your title. On a shelf nearby sits a collection of baskets in various sizes. Some are tightly woven with reeds. Others are patchy and clearly mended more than once. One still has a small laurel wreath resting on its edge, now dry and brittle. Dionysus picks it up gently, brushes away a bit of dust, and places it atop a clay amphora like a crown returned to storage. You spot a weathered stool with satyr carvings on the legs. The figures look surprised, one with eyebrows permanently arched, as if even centuries later they're still confused by the concept of moderation. A few cushions lie on top, flattened by time and grape juice stains. In one corner of the shed stands an amphora nearly as tall as you. It's sealed, but the markings along its neck are distinct clusters of grapes flanked by two dolphins. That's from the island, Dionysus says, his voice lowering a notch, where the vines grow on volcanic soil and the sea winds whisper secrets. You ask if the wine tastes different. He nods, like salt and thunder had a child. A donkey wanders into the shed. You didn't hear it approach. It's wearing a necklace of dried fig leaves and has a look of mild judgment in its eyes. Dionysus pats it on the neck. This is Melanthios. He disapproves of most things. The donkey snorts, then bumps your arm with its nose, perhaps in acknowledgement or warning. You hear a soft clatter and turn to see a worker dropping a bundle of rope and hooks onto the bench. She begins cleaning them slowly, wiping each tool with a cloth soaked in rosemary water. The scent fills the space, sharp, clean, calming. You ask how often they clean the tools. She answers without looking up after every harvest, or after every mistake. The idea of agricultural penance feels appropriate here, as if each miscut stem or botched knot deserves a ritual of repair. Not punishment, just recognition. Historians still argue whether these kinds of vineyard rituals were real or retrofitted by poets desperate for symbolism. Some say ancient Greek vineyards were purely functional. Others point to hymn fragments and votive offerings buried beneath rows of vines as proof that something deeper lingered in the soil. Dionysus, for his part, seems content to let the debate ferment. He lifts a wooden mallet and turns it in his hands. I once tried to introduce a mechanical press, he says. Faster, cleaner, more efficient. He sets the mallet down. The grapes tasted like regret. You help wind rope onto a spindle, your fingers moving with the rhythm the place seems to instill. Everything here, every task, every item, carries a kind of hush, not silence, exactly. More like reverence passed down in the grain of the wood and the warp of the baskets. You spot a faded mural painted across the interior wall. It shows figures dancing beneath a full moon, grapes in their hair, robes flowing. But what stands out isn't the movement, it's the expressions, calm, almost drowsy, not euphoric, more like a long exhale that never quite ends. One figure at the edge holds a cup, but hasn't yet taken a sip. You ask Dionysus if that scene ever happened. He tilts his head. Maybe. Maybe it will. You stay in the shed for a long time, sorting tools, coiling ropes, brushing dust from amphorae too large to move. The work is light, but it matters. Every gesture feels like part of a larger story, not just a story of wine, but of care, of attention given in quiet places when no one's watching, eventually. Dionysus claps his hands softly. Come, he says. The stompers are asleep. Let's visit the temple. You follow Dionysus down a narrow trail that dips between the vineyard rows and curves toward a grove of olive trees. The moon filters through the leaves, spilling silvery patches along the path like spilled milk. The olives above you are heavy and dark, hanging like quiet witnesses. A night wind stirs them gently, their rustling leaves hushing the world even further. The temple appears slowly, first as a flicker of firelight between trunks, then as a structure that seems less built than grown from the slope itself. It's small, rounded at the edges. Its whitewashed walls painted with climbing vines in green and gold. No grand columns, no marble steps, just a low entrance flanked by amphorae and dried laurel branches tied into circles. You duck your head to enter. Inside, the air changes. It smells like cedar ash, honey, and something fermented so long ago it became incense. The space is lit by small oil lamps, nestled in alcoves, their flames steady and subdued. At the center stands a simple altar, a block of stone with a deep basin carved into it. Several sealed amphorae rest nearby, each labeled with symbols you don't recognize. A few have fig leaves pressed into the wax. An apprentice in a linen robe kneels by the altar. painting another amphora with a fine brush. You can't tell what's being written. It looks more like music than language, fluid curves and dots, like notes hanging in midair. She doesn't look up, but she hums something soft and repetitive, the kind of tune that loops itself into your breathing before you notice. Dionysus approaches the altar and places both hands flat on the stone. For a moment, he closes his eyes. You think he might be praying, or listening, or simply remembering. This is where the wine rests before it's offered, he explains. We let it sit in the silence first, before the chants, before the feasts. He looks at you. Wine isn't just drink, it's memory, waiting to be invited. You walk slowly around the space. There are no statues of the god here, no grand image of Dionysus carved in heroic pose, just a handful of small clay figures tucked into corners. One holds a goblet with grapes spilling from it. Another lies on its side, snoring. You find this one oddly comforting. A tapestry hangs along the back wall, faded, threadbare in places, but still alive with shape. It shows a winding river lined with vineyards, and along its banks are figures kneeling, not dancing, not laughing, just kneeling, as if thanking the vines for something they haven't even tasted yet. Historians still argue whether temples like this one existed outside the myths. Some claim Dionysian worship was all ecstatic frenzy and torn ivy crowns. Others insist these quieter shrines were once common, places where mortals approached their gods not with madness, but with stillness, the kind of reverence that doesn't require spectacle, only presence. Dionysus gestures to a shelf built into the wall. There sit several cups, each carved from different materials, clay, bone, polished wood, and one that appears to be made from a seashell lacquered in gold. You pick up the wooden one. It fits your hand perfectly. You ask him who uses them. Anyone who needs to remember, he says. Remember what he considers this. That joy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sits. The apprentice rises now and sets down the freshly marked amphora. She bows, not deeply, just a nod. Dionysus returns it with a similar gesture. No words pass between them. You begin to suspect this temple runs largely on looks and shared silences. He leads you to a small side chamber, bare except for a reed mat and a low bench. You sit. He offers you a cup of water, cool, lightly infused with lemon and rosemary. Not wine, not yet. This is the part most forget, he says, watching the flame of the nearest lamp, the pause, the stillness between the vine and the celebration. His voice is nearly a whisper. If you miss this, you've missed everything. He leans back, resting his head against the wall. They always ask me about the madness. He murmurs, the rapture, the chaos. But no one ever asks what came before. His gaze drifts to the corner of the room, where a pair of sandals sits side by side. I planted vines for decades before I ever fermented one. You sit there a long time. No one interrupts. Even the olive trees seem to hold their breath. Eventually, Dionysus stands, stretching slowly. Come, he says. Let's visit the others. You return to the main chamber and find it empty. The apprentice has gone. The lamps are lower now, their flames thinner, gentler. As if bowing out of the scene, you step back into the night. The stars have shifted slightly. You can feel it, not in the sky, but in your bones, like you've been aligned with something old, something quietly important. Dionysus closes the door behind you and doesn't look back. The amphorae rest inside, sealed and waiting, outside the temple, The vineyard breathes in the night like a sleeping animal, settled, vast, and wrapped in its own comfort. You follow a narrow path that curves gently down the slope, lit now only by moonlight and the occasional glint from dewy leaves. The quiet is so complete, it's nearly its own presence, and then rustling, not wind, not leaves, from behind a row of trellises. Three satyrs emerge. You brace slightly, but these aren't the howling, pipe-playing wildlings the plays love to exaggerate. No wine-soaked eyes or twigs in their hair. These satyrs wear neatly wrapped tunics, their hooves dusted clean, and one of them is carrying a small basket of figs. They look up and freeze when they see Dionysus. You expect a bow or a flourish instead. They give him three slow nods, more neighbor than worshipper. One murmurs, evening, boss. Dionysus raises an eyebrow, evening, Melos. Melos, the tallest of the three, nods again, then holds out the fig basket. These are the last ones. We figured the vines might like company. He speaks like someone who's memorized the pace of night. The second satyr, smaller and slightly rounder, offers you a piece of honeycomb wrapped in a fig leaf. Welcome, he says quietly, to the quiet season. You accept it with a slight bow, unsure if this is a gift, a joke, or a ritual. It tastes like sunlight sealed in wax. The satyrs lead the way further down the path. You notice their tails flick lazily behind them, not in nervousness, but the kind of tail movement that says, "We've done this 1,000 times, and we still enjoy it." They speak softly among themselves about the state of the vines, which trees need trimming, and whether the crickets seem slower this year. It's the kind of everyday gossip you'd expect from gardeners, not mythic creatures. One of them mentions a goat who keeps sneaking into the pressing shed and rearranging the tools. They're convinced it's a spirit. You pass a wooden fence that's been mended so many times. It's more patchwork than original. The satyrs stop there, peering over. On the other side lies a small orchard. Figs, olives, pomegranates, and in its center, a low stone platform with a single clay jug resting in the middle. No guards, no offerings, just the jug, lit by moonlight like it wandered there and fell asleep. That's the old gift spot, one of the satyrs says, nodding toward it. Before temples, before amphorae, they just leave a cup or two in the moonlight. Sometimes wine, sometimes milk, sometimes rainwater if they forgot. Dionysus hums. Rainwater worked. You walk around the orchard slowly. The trees here seem younger, their trunks thinner, but they hold the same serenity. The satyrs pause beneath a pomegranate tree, gently checking the fruit. One offers you a small one, still green. Not ready, he says, but beautiful anyway. Historians still argue whether satyrs were ever considered wise. Most ancient texts portray them as chaos embodied, impulsive, lewd, ridiculous. But here they seem more like monks, earthy monks, with furry legs and excellent produce knowledge. Melos plucks a fig from a branch and examines it. People forget, he mutters. We're not just noise. We know the soil, too. Dionysus laughs. Only because you refuse to leave it alone. We don't need to, Melos replies. The soil's never boring. You continue walking, and the satyrs fall behind. No farewell, no ceremony, just a gradual fading into the vines, like they were never entirely separate from them in the first place. Dionysus stops at a low bench beside a fig tree and sits, patting the space next to him. You join him. The night has deepened further. A breeze rises up from the sea, stirring the vine leaves into a slow-motion wave. The The sound is barely there, like silk dragging across stone. He reaches into a pouch and pulls out a dried leaf. You expect him to crumble it or chew it, but instead, he lays it flat on his knee and begins to trace invisible lines across it. This is a map, he says, but not of land. You blink. It shows the memory of a vine, he adds, where it grew, what it tasted, which winds passed over it. I don't need it, of course, but I like the gesture. You ask if anyone else can read it. No one wants to, he replies. It's not a dramatic map. You lean back against the fig tree. Its bark is warm from the day, its branches still pulsing with scent. The fruit above you glows faintly in the moonlight. Dionysus folds the leaf and puts it away. That's the thing about vineyards, he says. Everyone thinks the magic is in the wine, but it's here, in the spaces between the picking and the pouring. You close your eyes. The ground beneath you feels steadier than stone, somewhere behind you. A satyr sings to himself, a tune you don't know. It's not a hymn, just a song, something that sounds like vines growing. The moon has tipped slightly westward by the time you rise from the fig bench. Your legs feel soft, like they've been politely borrowed by the earth. Dionysus stretches beside you, arms over his head, joints cracking gently, not like thunder, more like an old bookshelf settling. He gestures with his chin toward another path, this one less traveled and bordered by lavender bushes, grown half wild. As you follow him, you notice how the vineyard changes here. The vines are spaced differently. They curve, spiral, even lean in odd directions, as if growing according to a different plan entirely. They're older too. Their trunks are thick, gnarled, the bark flaking in scrolls. Dionysus pauses beside one and runs his hand down the twisted wood. This section is ancient, he says, almost reverently, planted when mortals still thought the stars were holes in a curtain. He crouches and begins to trace patterns in the dirt with a stick. The layout here, see how the vines spiral out from that olive tree. It's a map of the northern constellations. You squint. It looks mostly like a messy vineyard. He grins. It's more symbolic than accurate. You nod wisely. He begins sketching again, looping lines that cross and double back. The ancients believed vines grew better when they were aligned with the stars. Some even swore you had to sing to them under specific constellations. He taps a crescent shape in the dust. This curve matches the moon's rise during the first harvest festival. Supposedly, historians still argue whether there was ever a true sacred geometry of vineyards. Some claim it was just a poetic flourish used in hymns. Others insist there are surviving layouts, etched in forgotten fields, too neat to be accidents. But no one agrees on how intentional it really was. And Dionysus isn't helping the clarity. You want truth, he says, but wine prefers mystery as you walk. The path rises slightly, and the vines grow denser, arching overhead like a leafy cathedral. Lanterns hang from hooks hammered into the wooden trellises. They aren't lit, but you can see where the soot has streaked down over time. We light them only when someone's lost, he explains. Not often. You pause beneath a vine that's flowering out of season, tiny white blossoms nestled among ripening grapes. Dionysus touches one and says nothing. You feel, for a moment, like speaking would wrinkle the night. To your left, the slope falls away, revealing the whole vineyard spread below. In the distance, you see the flicker of the pressing shed's lamp, the pale rectangle of the temple, and the shimmer of olive trees whispering among themselves. You notice symbols carved into the trellis posts. Some are spirals, others like waves. Still others resemble eyes or vines looped into knots. You ask about them. Planting records, Dionysus says. But not just what went where, who planted, how they were feeling, whether their mother had recently passed. He pauses. Vines remember more than soil. You study the carvings more closely. One depicts a small figure curled beneath a grape cluster, seemingly asleep. Another shows a goat dancing in place, mid-prance with its tongue out. That one's accurate, Dionysus says, nodding. He disrupted a whole harvest by chewing the sacred vines and then tried to convince us why he was possessed. You smile. Was he? Dionysus shrugs. He was a goat. The vineyard narrows again, ending in a circular clearing with a low stone bench and a small sundial sunk into the earth. The moon casts just enough light to make out the markings months, phases, equinoxes. It feels strange, seeing a sundial at night. Dionysus sits and traces the arc of the gnomon's shadow with a fingertip. They used to plant based on its reading, he says, only when the shadow aligned with the fig tree's tip over there. He points. You squint. And yes, there's a fig tree, small and wiry, growing at the clearing's edge. What if it was cloudy, you ask? He shrugs. Then they waited. That was the whole point. The sky above feels enormous now, spread wide and thick with stars. You can just make out Orion dozing sideways and the tail of the little bear curling toward the mountain ridge. The breeze has slowed. Even the crickets sound like they're speaking more slowly. You sit beside Dionysus and let your fingers rest on the sundial. The stone is cool, smooth. You can feel the groove of centuries worn under hundreds of hands. Everything here, he says softly, moves slowly on purpose. The vines, the rituals, even the mistakes. You nod. The idea of errors taking their time to grow, just like the fruit. There's something oddly comforting about that. He stands again, brushing dust from his robe. Come, he says. There's a little temple cellar, nothing grand, just clay, quiet, and barrels thinking about the future. You follow, and you can't help but glance back at the sundial one more time, wondering if you'll ever be able to tell time by fig tree shadows again. The path now is barely a path at all, more a suggestion, winding between thickets of rosemary and low stone walls that crumble in polite silence. Dionysus walks ahead, humming something tuneless, the hem of his robe catching lavender stems that release scent with every step. You follow closely, the coolness of the earth reaching up through your sandals, like a memory trying to return. At the base of a gently sloping hill, you reach a half-hidden archway. It's so well blended with the landscape that you nearly miss it. Moss blankets the stones, and a fig tree leans protectively above the entrance. Dionysus pulls open the narrow wooden door with a soft creak, revealing a sliver of golden candlelight inside. You step into the cellar, and the temperature drops instantly. Not cold, just a deep, quiet coolness that has more to do with age than climate. The air is thick with scent resin, oak, and something faintly citrusy, like old peel left to sleep in the shadows. The walls are carved directly into the hill, curving like the inside of an ear. Racks of amphorae line each side, each marked with symbols, some familiar, others so old they've blurred into pure pattern. No one rushes here. Even the dust seems to have settled politely. Dionysus leads you toward the center, where a raised stone platform holds a grouping of amphorae set in a circle. Each one is sealed, their wax caps sculpted with tiny reliefs bees, waves, moons, birds mid-flight. You bend to examine one, tracing the etched lines of a dolphin beneath your fingertips. This is temple wine, he says, not for festivals, not for trade, only for rituals, quiet ones, the kind where no one speaks aloud, but everyone remembers the same thing anyway. You ask what they remember. He tilts his head. The first time they felt full, you think he means wine, but something about his voice suggests otherwise. An apprentice appears from the far shadows. She carries a tiny clay lamp and a thin brush. She doesn't speak, but begins repainting a faded spiral on one of the amphorae. Her presence doesn't interrupt the cellar's silence. It blends in, like smoke curling into an already dim room. Dionysus selects a smaller amphora from a shelf and lifts it with both hands. He carries it to a table in the back, round, with two chairs carved from figwood, both scarred from long use. He places the amphora in the center and gestures for you to sit. This is the wine we offer to ourselves, he says. Not the gods, not the ancestors, just the parts of us we forget during the noise. He uncorks it carefully. The scent rises, deep, plummy, but also smoky. You catch a note of something familiar. Olive wood, maybe thyme. It smells like dusk. He pours into two plain cups. No gold, no ivory. Just unglazed clay that's darkened from use. The wine itself is surprisingly light in color. With a faint shimmer, you take a sip. It tastes like every summer you've ever missed. It's not meant to impress, he says, watching your face. It's meant to remember. You ask how old it is. He shrugs. Depends on who's drinking. A long silence follows, but it's not empty. It's filled with distant dripping, somewhere deeper in the cellar, and the faint crackle of the apprentice's lamp. On one wall hangs a single piece of parchment, pressed flat beneath glass. You stand to examine it. It's a handwritten recipe, ink faded to amber, the letters looping and uncertain. Ingredients are listed without amounts. Instructions are more advice than command. One line simply reads, "Wait until it listens back." Historians still argue whether ancient winemaking truly included spiritual instructions. Most of the surviving records focus on agriculture, trade, and myth. But here, in this quiet hollow under a vineyard hill, it's hard not to believe that some vintners were trying to speak to something beyond profit or preservation. You ask Dionysus, who wrote the recipe. He raises a brow, someone who failed beautifully, and smiles. You finish your cup slowly. The wine does not rush. It settles in your chest like an echo. Dionysus stands, returns the amphora to its shelf, and runs his hand along the others. They'll rest here for years, he says. Some will turn bitter, some sweeter. All of them will change. He pauses, like people, but slower. As you leave the cellar, the fig tree rustles softly overhead, catching the breeze. The night outside is thicker now, more still. Even the stars seem less insistent. The world, for once, does not demand anything of you, and the wine, still on your tongue, says nothing. It only lingers. The door of the cellar closes behind you with a gentle thump, like a page being turned by someone who doesn't want to wake the book. Outside, the fig leaves ripple slightly in the wind. The stars overhead have brightened, pushing closer to the vineyard as though curious. A soft light clings to the stones under your feet. You don't know if it's moonlight or memory. Dionysus doesn't speak for a while. Neither do you. You're both listening. To what? You're not entirely sure, perhaps to how the grapes settle into the barrels, or how the vines exhale when no one's watching. Or maybe it's the silence between thoughts that finally has room to stretch. Eventually, he begins to walk again. You follow him along a low wall, past more rows of sleeping vines. The slope levels out, and soon you see a flat clearing beneath a canopy of olive trees. In the middle sits a circle of stones with cushions arranged around it. This is no altar, no sanctuary, just a space for sitting. Several figures already wait there, men and women, satyrs, one nymph lazily fanning herself with an ivy sprig. They look up as you arrive, but no one says a word. One of the satyrs nods toward an empty cushion. You sit. At the center of the circle stands a small table. Upon it, a single clay cup and a dish of sliced figs. That's it. No flutes, no speeches, just the items, waiting. Dionysus settles beside you and gestures slightly. A young woman across the circle picks up the cup, sips once, and passes it to her right when it reaches you. It's warm from many hands. The scent of the wine is now familiar, but layered, as if it's absorbed all the quiet that's passed through it. You drink, and something soft unfolds inside you. Not revelation, not drama, not just a slow, spreading calm. Dionysus leans over. This, he whispers, is the other me. You blink. The part they rarely write songs about. He continues. The version who likes shade, not sunlight, who prefers poems before dawn, not parades at noon. You look at him more carefully now. In this light, he seems thinner, older, maybe, not weary, but worn in, like a tool used just enough to fit the hand perfectly. I've always had two sides, he says, the wild and the still, but people only remember the noise. The cup passes on. The circle continues. No one rushes. He turns his face upward. Do you know I was worshipped in the theater? Too. You nod. The connection is faintly familiar. He smiles. They think I invented it. But really, I just understood it. The masks, the silence before the line, the hush when the audience leans in, not to laugh or cry, but just to listen. That's the sacred part, not the climax, not the chorus. You ask if the vineyard and the theater are the same. He chuckles. Only one of them gets you tipsy on accident. You glance around the circle. Most of those seated are looking at nothing at all, eyes half closed, minds clearly elsewhere. No ceremony has been announced, no prayers recited, but everyone here feels deeply present, even in their stillness. Someone across the circle hums a few notes. Another taps a finger softly against a fig stem in rhythm. Not a song, just sound, existing for no purpose but to exist. Historians still debate whether Dionysus was truly the god of both chaos and calm, or if later poets simply couldn't make up their minds. Some scrolls depict him laughing as cities burn. Others describe him weeping at the fall of a single fig. He's both a puzzle and a mirror, showing whatever the viewer expects. You ask him which side he prefers. He considers this for a long time, then finally says, the side that's allowed to sit. The fig dish makes its way around. You take one, sweet, rich, and soft. It tastes like dusk, reduced into syrup. You chew slowly, and for a moment, it feels like the world forgets about time. When the cup comes back to Dionysus, he doesn't drink. He lifts it, tilts it slightly toward the ground, and lets a few drops fall onto the soil. For the roots, he says, so they know we remember. Everyone nods. No clapping, no thanks, just breath and breeze and the occasional blink. Eventually, the circle breaks. One by one, the others rise and drift off into the vineyard. Some head toward the temple. Others vanish into the shadows under olive trees. One satyr curls up beneath a fig bush and begins to snore instantly. You remain seated. Dionysus stands, stretches again, and reaches down to help you up. Come, he says. It's time for the tasting. You blink. Wasn't that what we just did? He grins. That was memory. Now let's try possibility. And he turns, robe catching on the stone, as the breeze carries away the last warmth of the fig. You follow Dionysus through the olive grove, the leaves rustling overhead like parchment, being softly thumbed through by unseen hands. The path narrows again, then opens into a flat terrace carved into the hillside, its edges bordered by rows of newly stacked amphorae. They glint under the stars like smooth-skinned fruit, each sealed and marked with a fresh line of white paint, some curved, some jagged, one simply dotted in a spiral. The air here is cooler, touched by a breeze coming from the coast. You can smell salt in it now, layered behind the deeper scents of pressed grape and resin-soaked clay. Crickets sing in low harmony, somewhere below. An owl sounds once and then falls silent, as if it, too, is paying attention. A long table runs through the middle of the terrace, low to the ground, surrounded by floor cushions in faded red and olive green. Some are patched, others have grape stains that look like long-forgotten maps. The table itself is set with wooden trays, each holding a tiny clay cup. No two cups match. Dionysus gestures for you to sit. This, he says, is where the future gets its first sip. You lower yourself onto a cushion. The cushion sighs under your weight, puffing up a small dust cloud that smells faintly of time. Across the table, a mortal vintner sits already, sharpening a stick into a tasting spoon. Her hands are dyed to the wrists in purple. She nods at you, but says nothing. From the shadows come two apprentices carrying a fresh amphora. It's unmarked, new. Its surface gleams with a sheen of olive oil rubbed into the clay. They place it in the center of the table. Dionysus leans forward and draws a sharp blade across the wax seal. The sound it makes is almost too soft to hear, like old paper tearing. He removes the stopper, sniffs the opening, then nods. It's ready to speak, he says. You watch as he pours into the first cup, a thin stream of wine the color of burnt sienna. It swirls slightly, catching the starlight, releasing a soft, smoky aroma that hints at pomegranate and whetstone. He passes the cup to the vintner. She drinks, closes her eyes, then mutters, "It remembers the drought." Dionysus nods solemnly. He pours another cup, this one lighter in color. The next taster sips and says, "It's arguing with itself." Everyone nods again, apparently. That's a known flavor profile. You receive your cup next. The wine is almost clear, with only the faintest tint of rose. You sip, and it's strange, not unpleasant, but indecisive, like it hasn't figured out what story to tell. It starts one way, floral, soft, then turns tart, then ends on a note that feels like copper coins left in rain. Dionysus watches your expression. You say, "It's nervous." He beams. "Good. The shy ones are worth waiting for. Each amphora poured tonight is different. Some wines are bold, loud in the mouth, shouting their history with every gulp. Others whisper. One is so still and mild it tastes like holding your breath underwater. Another seems to argue with itself halfway through, like a myth retold by two people who remember it differently. No one rates or ranks the wines. No one toasts. Each taster simply describes what they felt, and the others nod, sometimes smiling, sometimes furrowing their brows as if in sympathy. One satyr takes a sip and says, "This one tastes like someone leaving without saying goodbye." Everyone murmurs in agreement. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks truly believed wine carried emotion, or if this idea was purely theatrical. Some surviving plays mention wine betraying its drinker, or revealing hidden grief. But records from rural sanctuaries like this one suggest a quieter truth that wine wasn't judged. It was understood, so not as a drink, but as a storyteller in liquid form, as the amphora empties. Dionysus runs his fingers along its lip and whispers something, not a prayer, a thank you. Perhaps. You ask him how he knows when a wine is done aging. He smiles. When it no longer fears being opened, the tasting continues under the quiet hush of a moon that seems to lean in just slightly. Curious but not intrusive, each amphora has its story. Each sip adds to the quiet mood building among the group, a sort of shared stillness. No intoxication, just awareness. At one point, a breeze sends a few fig leaves skittering across the table. No one moves to stop them. They're allowed to attend. The final cup of the evening is poured into a cracked vessel with a repaired handle. Dionysus drinks this one himself. He closes his eyes and lets the silence settle around him like a shawl. You watch as he sets the cup down carefully, pressing it into the dust beside his cushion. "This one," he says softly, "tastes like an ending that doesn't mind being final." And no one says anything more. By the time the tasting concludes, the moon has moved higher, casting silver lines across the amphorae like delicate threads. The cushions are empty now, some turned over where satyrs rose lazily and wandered off into the vines. A few fig leaves still cling to the table. The cups sit where they were left, some empty, some half full, all of them quietly breathing the cool night air. Dionysus stands slowly, brushing the dust from his robe with long, unhurried strokes. You rise with him, your limbs feeling loose and boneless in the best way, as though the wine has gently rearranged your muscles into something more willing to drift. He doesn't say where you're going next. You simply walk. The vineyard stretches outward in soft, undulating rows. The vines now little more than silhouettes, their leaves whispering gossip to one another in the dark. And as you walk between them, you begin to notice something odd. Voices, not loud, not close, just little stories, half told, floating between the vines. A laugh, a sentence, a sigh. It's not frightening, more like passing by someone else's dreams. Dionysus glances at you. The vineyard remembers. You ask what it's remembering now. He tilts his head. Conversations, songs, footsteps, lovers arguing about baskets. You chuckle. He continues. "There's a theory," he says, "that grapevines absorb not just nutrients from the soil, but impressions from everything that happens nearby. Some claim that's why wine from battlefields tastes harsher, why mountain wine is wistful, why island vintages always end on salt. Historians still argue whether there's any truth to the idea that a place's emotion alters its produce. Most dismiss it as poetic nonsense, but others, especially those who've lived with the vines, speak of uncanny consistency, how harvests following a hard year produce brooding wines, how grapes grown near laughter ferment differently. Dionysus doesn't seem concerned with settling the debate. "I know what I taste," he says. "And I taste Hera's scowl in last year's blend." You ask if the other Olympians ever visit the vineyard. He pauses. "Rarely." Then, a grin. "But there was one season, just once, when even Hera approved a vintage. You stop walking. He nods solemnly. It was subtle. She didn't say it aloud, but she poured a second cup, and she didn't throw it at anyone. He gestures toward a stone outcropping where a few figures are gathered around a low flame. You approach and realize it's a mix of mortals and something more ambiguous. Perhaps dryads, perhaps very tired gods. They all wear the same expression, that satisfied blankness of someone whose mind has gone quiet enough to hear itself again. One man is humming gently while sharpening a stick. A woman is weaving vine leaves into a circle. Another figure sits absolutely still, eyes closed, arms folded, as though attempting to hatch an idea by sheer proximity to peace. You sit among them. Someone hands you a cup, empty. This time, you hold it anyway. There's comfort in the curve of it, in the way it balances perfectly in your palm. Dionysus lowers himself onto a rock, stretches out one leg, and sighs as though removing an invisible pack from his shoulders. Wine, he says, wasn't always about festivals. You nod, he goes on, before the toasts, before the theater, before the chaos, wine was offered quietly. Just a cup left beside a root, or poured into the sea. He looks toward the fire. It wasn't a celebration. It was a conversation. You ask. With who he raises an eyebrow. That's the good part. No one was quite sure. He leans forward and pokes the fire with a vinewood stick. Sparks lift upward, drifting into the night air like tiny, glowing gnats. The woman weaving the vine circle speaks. We used to call it the middle ritual. Not prayer, not feast, just pausing. You sense everyone around the fire understands this instinctively. The ritual of pause, of resting the cup between sips, of watching the flame instead of the wine. There's a quiet tale passed around the circle now. No performance, no raised voice, just a story about a donkey who fell in love with a vineyard statue and refused to leave her side for 7 seasons. Each detail is added by someone new, like bread passed hand to hand. By the end, no one can say what was real and what was added for flavor. But that's fine. Truth, like tannin, needs time to settle. Dionysus, for once, says nothing. He simply listens, eyes half-lidded. The fire painting flickers on his face. You ask him if he's ever made a bad wine. He grins, all the time. You blink. He shrugs. It's the vineyard's right to disagree. I only suggest. You sip from your empty cup and taste nothing. And yet, it feels like the best sip of the night. Above you, a shooting star trails across the sky. No one points, no one claps. It just happens, and that's enough. The fire crackles down into soft coals. The wind shifts as someone snores quietly. And somewhere far off, a lone satyr sings, off-key, sleepy, and perfect. When you wake, though you're not sure you ever truly slept, you're still seated by the fire, your empty cup cradled loosely in your hand. The coals have cooled to ash, and only a few pale threads of smoke drift upward like forgotten intentions. Dionysus is gone, or perhaps just not visible. The figures from the circle have melted into the landscape, and for a moment, it feels as though the vineyard itself is all that remains. You rise, slowly, and brush the dust from your robe. The path in front of you is marked now, not by torches, not by footprints, but by scent. The faintest thread of wine and mint and wild thyme leads you toward a grove tucked behind a low wall of flat stones. Inside the grove, the trees grow closer together, intertwined, heavy with age. Vines climb their trunks like sleepy serpents, and the ground is soft with leaves. Here, nestled between two olive trees. You find a wooden platform shaded by hanging grape canopies. Laid out neatly upon it are folded cloths, a bundle of herbs, a small clay pot, and 3 large scrolls. A mortal sits cross-legged at the far end, dipping a reed into the pot and writing slowly onto one of the scrolls. She doesn't look up. "This is the symposium," she says softly, "but not the loud kind." You settle onto the mat beside her. She finishes a line, gently places a stone to hold the scroll open, and turns to you. "We're writing down the possibilities," she says. You ask what that means. Wine wasn't always for stories already told. Sometimes it was meant to help imagine the ones not yet spoken. She unrolls one of the scrolls to show you. It's covered in questions. What if vines grew in the clouds? What if gods grew old but mortals did not? What if pomegranates whispered their secrets before they ripened every year? She explains. We invite the vineyard to inspire new answers. The wine guides the tongue, not to speak, but to wonder. She offers you a reed. Add something if you like. You hesitate, then write. What if silence fermented into memory? She smiles when she reads it. That one tastes like honey. Dionysus appears again, quietly, as usual, emerging from between 2 trees, carrying a shallow wooden tray. On it, 3 small cups, each one a different shape, one flared, one chipped, one perfect. He sets it down and gestures toward them. These are medicinal wines, he says, not potions, just encouragements. He picks up the flared one. This one clears the mind. He drinks, closes his eyes, then exhales slowly. See, I even remember where I put my sandals. You take the second, the chipped cup. It's bitter at first sip, then slowly melts into something herbal and darkly sweet. Your shoulders relax. You didn't realize they were tense. This one, Dionysus says, was once used to help with dreams. Some say it wards off regret. Others say it gives you more of it, just softer. You ask what's in the third. He taps the perfect cup. No one knows. We call it the maybe. You don't drink that one. You just hold it, watching the surface. It reflects the trees, your face, and somehow stars not currently overhead. Dionysus sits beside you and gestures toward the scrolls. Did you know some of the earliest healers used wine as a way to measure honesty? You shake your head. They'd pour a small cup, offer it to the patient, and wait, not to treat symptoms, just to see what the person would say afterward. Sometimes truth needs something fermented to soften the edges. Historians still argue whether wine ever served as formal medicine. Some say yes, citing ancient recipes mixed with myrrh and honey. Others dismiss it, calling it a convenient excuse to drink before diagnosis. But the quiet rituals, like this one, rarely made it into records. They survived only in shadows, handed down through apprentices too sleepy to question them. Dionysus rolls up one scroll and hands it to the mortal woman. She takes it without speaking and tucks it beneath her arm. This one's for the next drought, he says. Then he rises, stretches his arms skyward, and lets out a low groan. The gods were not built for sitting this long, he mutters. My knees haven't forgiven me for inventing vines. You laugh. He turns to you. Come. There's one more thing you should see. You walk with him back through the grove. The wind has picked up slightly, rustling the trees in long, slow waves. You realize it's been hours since you've heard a bird. The vineyard, it seems, has slipped into its final rest for the night. Dionysus stops before a weathered wooden gate. It's small, simple, and painted the same dusty gray as the earth. He opens it with a soft creak and leads you inside. Here, at the heart of the vineyard, is the oldest vine. It's massive, curling up a stone archway like a serpent embracing an altar. Its bark is thick, knotted, and scarred. Some of its branches are bare, others bloom, improbably, with pale blossoms despite the season. Dionysus places one hand on its trunk. This one has outlived emperors. It's listened to arguments, songs, weeping, and laughter. It's tasted drought, war, and festivals so wild the goats gave up trying to help. He turns to you. It produces exactly one cluster a year, always different, always imperfect, but no one dares ignore it. You walk forward and touch the vine gently. It feels warm. What do you call it, you ask? Dionysus smiles. I don't. It remembers enough names already. You stand with your hand still resting on the bark of the ancient vine, its roughness grounding you like an anchor dropped into time itself. A slight tremor passes beneath your palm, not movement, exactly, but something closer to a breath. The vine exhales age and sweetness in equal measure. You find yourself whispering something, without planning to, a thank you, maybe, or an apology, or nothing at all. Dionysus steps back and folds his arms. Some say this vine was a gift from the mother herself, he murmurs. Others claim I brought it from the east, tucked beneath my cloak, before cloaks had names. You glance up at its tangled crown, and what do you say? He looks amused. I say vines lie, this one especially. You both chuckle softly. From behind the vine, a path snakes gently downhill, overgrown with sage and thyme. Dionysus begins down it, slow and careful. You follow. Each step releases fragrance. The wind tugs at the hem of your robe now and then, as if making sure you haven't fallen behind. The path ends in a shallow amphitheater of stone, long since overtaken by wildflowers and creeping mint. Its shape remains a circle of seats, a flattened stage, a backdrop of olive trees swaying with practiced theatrical timing. You sit on the edge of one crumbling bench. Dionysus remains standing, center stage, looking around like an actor unsure of his lines. This, he says, was where we used to talk about wine out loud. You raise an eyebrow, not the drinking. He continues, the meaning, the metaphors, the rituals. He waves a hand, all the poetic nonsense people accused me of inventing. He walks the perimeter of the space, brushing his fingers across tall stalks of fennel and dry yarrow. Here's the thing, he says. People assume my worship was chaos, madness, release, and it was, sometimes, but often it was this. He gestures at the space around you, an open-air debate under fig trees, arguments between farmers and poets, someone reciting a verse so slowly that birds landed on their shoulders. You smile, sounds restful. He grins. It was boring enough to start fights. A breeze rolls across the amphitheater, stirring the herbs into motion. For a moment, it sounds like an audience shifting in their seats. Dionysus sits beside you now, elbows on his knees. They debated whether the gods could taste their own offerings, he says. Whether ambrosia made you wise or just distracted. You ask, could they? He shrugs. Depends on the vintage. Below the stage, a small door lies half buried in ivy. You only notice it when a gust of wind flutters the vines aside. Dionysus follows your gaze. That used to be the wine library, he says. Scrolls, jars, samples, legends, all organized by flavor. He squints. There was a whole shelf devoted to wines that taste like regrets you're proud of. You laugh, and he joins you. Historians still argue, he says after a moment. Whether my cult ever had philosophical branches, whether there were Dionysian scholars, they dig for temples, for masks, for broken goblets, but they never imagine us thinking. You glance around the amphitheater. They missed this. He nods. A small lizard darts across the stage and freezes under a daisy. You both pause, giving it time to settle. No need to rush even the creatures here. A thought occurs to you. Do you ever miss the wild version of all this? He smiles. But it's slower now, sometimes. But wildness gets tired too. Even revelry needs somewhere to sit down. He plucks a daisy and begins pulling the petals off one by one, letting them scatter on the bench between you. You know, he says, they once held a symposium here, entirely about whether wine made truths easier or just more poetic. You ask what they decided. He tosses the flower's stem. They forgot the question halfway through. The moon is lower now. The sky behind the trees is bluing at the edges, though the sun hasn't announced itself yet. There's a softness in the air that only comes just before dawn, a hush layered on top of everything else. Dionysus rises and stretches again. Come, there's a cat I want you to meet. You blink. She's been here longer than me, he says seriously, only sleeps during storms. And she knows every story told beneath these vines. You walk back up the path, through the sage, through the thyme, through the fading night. The breeze grows gentler, and every leaf seems to be leaning toward morning. You don't speak, because you know the vineyard is listening. The cat is already waiting. You find her stretched across a sun-warmed stone near the outer edge of the vineyard, her eyes half closed, tail flicking with the authority of one who has seen too many centuries to be impressed by gods or mortals. She's mottled gray, with a splotch of white under her chin and the kind of ears that twitch at unseen things. Dionysus approaches first. He bends carefully and rubs behind her ear. She tolerates this with a single blink. Then he straightens and gestures for you to come closer. She's never left the vineyard, he says. Refuses to. Says it gets too loud out there. You sit beside the cat slowly, not quite touching her. Her tail flicks again, once, but she doesn't move away. Her body is warm. Her whiskers shimmer faintly in the pre-dawn light. She's heard every story, Dionysus murmurs, every harvest song, every prayer said with cracked lips, every argument over which grapes to mix. He smiles faintly. She didn't like the goat, not one bit. You ask if she ever talks. He considers, only if you mistake purring for prophecy. The cat begins to knead the stone with her paws, methodical, content, somewhere nearby. A rooster starts its warm-up crow. The air shifts. You feel it in your skin, the edge of morning folding over the final blanket of night. You rise and stretch and follow Dionysus along one last path, a gentle slope that leads up to the highest point of the vineyard. From here, you can see everything: the winding rows of vines, the faint haze where the temple lies, the pressing shed nestled beside the olive grove, the terraces stacked like quiet thoughts, and beyond that, the sea, still dark, still vast. Dionysus stands beside you with arms crossed, his gaze sweeping the land like a father checking on sleeping children. You came here to watch grapes, he says, and you did. You nod. But really, he continues, you came to see what stillness tastes like. He turns toward you fully now, the rising light catching the creases around his eyes. So much of me has been loud, celebrated, feared, misunderstood. His voice softens. But this vineyard, this quiet, this rhythm, is just as holy. He steps forward and brushes his hand over a nearby vine. These rows are filled with stories that never became myths, just lives, tastes, silences, a pause. Not everything sacred needs a procession. Below you, a soft movement, the workers beginning to stir. Someone opens the pressing shed's door. A temple apprentice steps out and stretches her arms skyward. The first tools clink faintly from a distance. The day doesn't rush into place. It glides in like a second breeze. Dionysus looks at you once more. You don't have to believe in gods, he says, but you should believe in what takes its time. He lifts one hand, gives you a small, dry-fingered wave, and then turns, walking back down into the vines. One step at a time. No divine exit, no thunder, just the soft creaks of sandals against soil. You stay where you are, watching the sky soften into pale blue. Then you descend too, slowly, one step at a time, back into the rhythm of earth and vine. And now, as the sun creeps gently over the edge of the horizon, casting long light across the vineyard rows, you let the breath in your body deepen, then settle. The scent of rosemary and pressed grapes still lingers in the air, warm and quiet, the way a favorite blanket holds a memory even after it's been folded and put away. You picture the oldest vine, still blooming in defiance of season. You picture the silent amphorae resting in shadow, still whispering their vintage dreams. You remember the donkey, the figs, the cup passed without ceremony, and the cat, who likely saw it all before you arrived, and will see it all long after. Your limbs are heavy now, but not in exhaustion, in gratitude. You've walked, and watched, and tasted. You've listened, not to proclamations, but to the small murmurs between them, to a God who prefers pruning shears to thunderbolts, to a vineyard that worships silence the way others worship fire. The vines are sleeping again, and perhaps you are too, or will be soon. Let your breathing soften, let your thoughts spiral slowly, like the carvings on the amphorae. Let your memories ferment, undisturbed, into something sweet and slow. There is no hurry, no harvest deadline, no revelation waiting at the end of this breath. Only dusk, only grapes, only stories told so quietly. You have to be still to hear them. Sleep now, if you can, or don't. Just stay. Let the vineyard keep you company.